In 1925, 7 men entered the swampy valley of Pope's Lick Creek near Louisville with plans for a bridge that would connect the coal roads across the deepest gorge in the county. They erected scaffolding 70 feet above the valley floor and stretched ropes between trees growing at the edge of the cliff. By the end of the job, only 3 remained, and none of them spoke of what walked beneath the rafters on foggy nights. This report remained sealed in the company archives until the 1970s, marked not for publication, keep for official use only. Then it was stolen from the archives. So, before we continue, please make sure you're subscribed and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you. The morning of April 21st brought a low fog that filled the valley so thickly that it looked like cotton wool had settled between the trees. The air held the cold of the night even at sunrise, and the dampness settled on the skin in heavy drops. There was no wind. The light came through yellow and muted through the veil that hung motionless. Our camp was located on the northern edge of the gorge, where the ground leveled out under oak and cedar trees. The tent stood in a row 10 paces apart, the canvas stretched over poles and secured with stakes. The tools lay in a 6-foot-long wooden box. Saws, hammers, an auger, wrenches, a box of 3-inch nails, a skein of hemp rope. Food was stored in galvanized barrels to keep rats out. A sack of flour, salted meat in brine, dried beans, lard, cans of corn, and molasses. Water came from a stream that flowed east of the camp, cold and clear until it reached the lowlands. Thomas Redcliffe was the chief engineer of the project, a tall man with a straight back who wore wire-rimmed glasses and wrote down every number in a leather journal that he kept under his arm even while eating. Harvey Donovan, the foreman, managed people with short commands and kept his hands in the pockets of his overalls when he wasn't working. Sam Phillips, the inspector from the company before me, arrived first and knew the maps better than anyone else. George Turner was a carpenter, his hands sinewy, his fingers calloused, and he could tell by eye whether a beam was straight or crooked. Walter Green, a surveyor, carried a brass theodolite on a tripod and checked angles 3 times before recording them. Dr. Elias Crow kept his distance from the work sites and treated cuts with iodine from his black bag. Joseph Watts was a local guide from the village below the valley, a quiet man with narrow eyes who walked silently and smoked a pipe filled with tobacco that smelled like maple syrup. The trestle was to span a gorge 180 feet wide and 72 feet high from the bottom to the level of the rails. The support posts were already in place, driven into the rock a year ago by a crew that had worked during the summer. We had to finish the upper beams, lay the sleepers, secure the rails, and conduct a final inspection by the end of May. On April 22nd, the second day of work, we started at dawn. The fog had not yet lifted. Redcliffe climbed down the ladder to the middle platform and checked the beam connections. Donovan commanded the lifting of new beams with a block and rope. Turner adjusted the spikes with a hammer. Green set up the theodolite at the edge of the cliff and looked through the lens at the opposite side. I recorded the progress and checked the drawings for accuracy. By noon, we had lifted 3 beams. The sun broke through the fog, but the air remained heavy and humid. Watts brought water from the stream in a bucket, and we drank from a shared cup. Dr. Crow treated a scratch on Donovan's hand where a splinter had gone under the skin. On the 3rd day, the 23rd, the work continued without incident. The weather remained clear. The wind picked up from the south and carried the scent of flowering dogwoods from the edge of the forest. We completed 4 more beams, and Redcliffe was pleased with the pace. At dinner, he said that at this rate we would be finished by mid-May, maybe sooner. The strangeness began on the morning of the 24th. When I came out of the tent, the air carried a smell that hadn't been there before. It was sharp and old at the same time, reminiscent of wet wool mixed with something metallic, as if rusty iron had been lying in water for a long time. The smell lingered low, not dispersing in the wind. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. Watts stood by the fire, frying salted meat in a pan, the smoke rising straight up. Turner sharpened a saw on a whetstone, the sound of metal against stone cutting through the morning air. We went down to the bridge after breakfast. Redcliffe ordered us to start with the northern section, where the beams needed additional reinforcement. The fog returned and filled the bottom of the gorge so that the ground below was invisible. Only a white expanse that moved in slow waves. In the middle of the day, Donovan shouted that he could hear something. We stopped. The sound came from below, from the fog. Not clear, but composite, as if 2 voices were sounding simultaneously. A low hum and a high whistle above it. It lasted a few seconds, then stopped. We waited, but nothing else followed. Donovan shrugged and said it was probably the wind in the crevice below. Redcliffe agreed and ordered us to continue. On the night of the 24th, I lay in my tent and heard the same sound again. It came around midnight, quiet but clear. Two voices joined in one long howl. It lasted longer than during the day, maybe a minute. Then silence. I got up and looked out through the flap of the tarp. The moon shone through the sparse clouds. The camp lay motionless. The fire was burning down to embers. I saw no one outside. On the morning of the 25th, Green found tracks. He was setting up a tripod on the southern edge of the ravine and called the others over. We approached and saw prints in the soft mud at the edge of the cedar trees. They were strange. The heel was narrow. The front part was split in two, like a cloven hoof, but with a wider distance between the halves than a deer's. The size was large, about 7 inches long. The tracks ran parallel to the edge of the cliff, a yard from the edge, then turned and disappeared into the cedar thicket. Watts crouched down and studied the prints silently. Then he stood up and said that it was not a deer or a goat. Donovan asked what it was then. Watts did not answer immediately, but took out his pipe and filled it with tobacco with slow movements. Finally, he said that there were stories in the valley about something that walked through the ravine and across the bridge when the fog was low. He said that the locals did not go near that place after sunset. Redcliffe asked what stories. Watts said it was better not to talk about it during daylight hours. Redcliffe smiled and replied that we were here to build a bridge, not listen to children's stories. Watts shrugged and walked away. By the evening of the 25th, the temperature had dropped sharply. The cold came with sunset and brought with it a wind from the west that swayed the treetops and whistled through the bridge cables. We had dinner by the fire, beans with bacon and corn porridge. Dr. Crow said that the air was humid, which was unpleasant for the lungs. Turner coughed and warmed himself by the fire closer than the others. During the night, I woke up to the sound of knocking on the bridge beams. It wasn't the wind. The blows were rhythmic, slow, as if someone were walking heavily on the wooden beams. The knocking went from the south end to the north, stopped, then came back. I lay there listening. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear the blood in my ears. Then the knocking stopped. In the morning, no one mentioned the nighttime sounds. We went down to the bridge and found that one of the ropes holding the beam lifting block had been cut. It wasn't broken or frayed. It was cut cleanly, as if with a knife. The rope was hemp, an inch thick, new. Donovan examined the edge of the cut and said it wasn't wear and tear. Redcliffe ordered the rope to be replaced and the other fastenings to be checked. On April 27th, the birds disappeared. In the morning, the forest was quiet. No whistling cardinals, no tapping woodpeckers, no chattering jays. The silence was unnaturally complete, as if the air had absorbed the sound. We worked in this silence all day. Even the sound of hammers was muffled. Towards evening, Turner said he felt as if someone was watching from the edge of the trees. But when he turned around, he saw no one. On the night of the 27th, I saw it for the first time. There was no moon, and the sky was covered with clouds. I left the tent to relieve myself around 2 o'clock in the morning. The fire had burned out, with only red embers glowing faintly. I walked to the edge of the camp, where the ground sloped down to the bushes. I stopped and smelled something. The same smell as on the morning of the 24th, wet fur and metal, but stronger, closer. I looked up and saw a figure at the edge of the cedars 30 yards away from me. It stood on its hind legs, as tall as a tall man, maybe a little taller. Its head was irregular in shape, a long muzzle protruding forward and 2 curved protrusions rising on either side. Its eyes caught the faint light of the coals and reflected it with a dull amber glow. Its arms hung long, its hands dropped below its knees. Its legs stood firm, but strangely, as if its joints bent differently than a human's. It did not move. I did not move. The air between us held that sharp smell, and I felt dizzy, as if the ground had swayed beneath my feet. My mouth went dry. My hands hung at my sides, my fingers unresponsive. Then the figure stepped back into the shadows of the trees and disappeared. It didn't walk away. It just dissolved into the darkness, as if it had never been there. I stood there for a long time. My breathing was ragged. My knees were shaking. When I returned to the tent, I didn't close my eyes until dawn. On the morning of the 28th, I told Redcliffe that I had seen something at the edge of the camp during the night. He asked what exactly. I described its shape, height, eyes. Redcliffe looked at me for a long time, then said it was probably a bear standing on its hind legs. I replied that bears don't have eyes like that and don't stand still for so long. Redcliffe said that imagination plays a role at night and told me to get back to work. Donovan heard the conversation and came over. He said he had also heard sounds at night. Not knocking, but breathing, heavy and steady, as if something large was breathing right behind the tent canvas. He said he didn't dare look out. Watts stood by the fire and listened silently. When we fell silent, he took out his pipe and said that the people down below call it the goat man, or the creature from the valley. He said it comes when they build something over the gorge, as if it doesn't want the place to be disturbed. He said that 2 years ago, a worker fell from the bridge while installing the support pillars and broke his neck. But before he fell, he shouted that someone was pulling him by his feet. Redcliffe said it was superstitious nonsense and ordered everyone back to work. We obeyed, but work was slow that day. Everyone was looking over their shoulders. Turner dropped his hammer twice. Green made a mistake in his measurements and had to redo the work. On April 29th, the fog returned and lay thick on the bottom of the gorge all day. We were working on the bridge, and the beams disappeared into the whiteness below, as if hanging in a void. Around noon, Green said he saw movement in the fog below us. Something large was moving between the support pillars. We stopped and looked down. The fog moved in slow waves, but it was impossible to make out anything. Then we heard a voice. It came from below, from the whiteness, and called his name. Thomas. The voice was strange, neither male nor female, somewhere in between, and it echoed as if two people were speaking with a slight delay. Redcliffe stopped. His face turned pale. He stared down into the fog, his fingers clenching the edge of the beam so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The voice repeated, "Thomas, come down. Come here." Redcliffe stepped toward the edge of the platform. Donovan shouted his name and grabbed his shoulder. Redcliffe jerked as if waking up and stepped back. His breathing was ragged. He said through clenched teeth that it was the voice of his wife who had died 3 years ago. We went upstairs and didn't work for the rest of the day. Redcliffe sat by the fire and stared into the flames. His hands trembled as he drank water from a mug. On the night of April 30th, the first thing happened. Turner came out of his tent around midnight. I heard the tarp being pulled back, then footsteps. The footsteps weren't heading toward the bushes or the fire. They were heading straight for the edge of the ravine. I got up and looked out. The moon was shining brightly, and I could see Turner's silhouette walking slowly and unnaturally toward the cliff, his arms hanging at his sides. I shouted his name. He didn't stop. I ran out of the tent and ran after him. Donovan and Phillips came out too. We caught up with Turner 10 steps from the edge. Donovan grabbed his arm and turned him around. Turner's eyes were open but unfocused. He looked right through us as if he couldn't see us. His lips moved, whispering something indistinct. We dragged him back to the tents. Dr. Crow came out with a candle and examined Turner. His pupils were dilated, his breathing slow. Crow said it looked like somnambulism or a trance. We laid Turner back in the tent, and Donovan stayed nearby on guard until morning. At dawn, Turner woke up. He said he didn't remember how he got out of the tent. He said he heard a voice, a woman's voice, soft, calling his name and telling him to go to the edge, where they would show him something. He said he couldn't resist. His legs moved on their own. On May 1st, we found tracks around the entire camp. They went around the outer perimeter, 20 feet from the tents. The prints were clear in the soft ground, the same cloven hooves, but now we could see other details. The depth of the pressure at the front, which indicated heavy weight, and scratches, as if claws had scraped the dirt when turning. Redcliffe said we would continue working despite the incidents. He said the contract required completion by mid-May, and the company would not accept delays without good reason. Watts said the good reason was right there in the mud, but Redcliffe wasn't listening. We went down to the bridge. Work was intense. Every sound made us turn around. The fog hung low now, even when the sun was high. The smell of wet wool and metal grew stronger, hanging thick in the air. Around 3 in the afternoon, Phillips was working on the south section, bolting down a sleeper. He sat on the edge of the beam, his back to the ravine. The others were on the north side. I stood on the upper platform and recorded the progress in the logbook. I heard a sound, not loud but sharp, the crack of wood. I looked up and saw Phillips sitting motionless. Then he jerked forward, as if something had pulled him by the legs. He shouted. His hands grabbed the beam, his fingers clinging to the wood. His legs dangled over the void. I ran along the top beam to the south side. Donovan and Turner ran from below. Phillips was holding on, but his fingers were slipping. His face was white, his eyes wide open. He was screaming that something was holding his legs, pulling him down. Donovan got there first. He grabbed Phillips's hand and pulled him up. Turner grabbed his other arm. They pulled, but the resistance was strong, as if a heavy load was hanging below. Then suddenly it gave way and Phillips collapsed onto the beam. Donovan and Turner fell backward. We lifted Phillips and carried him to the upper platform. His legs were scratched. Deep gashes ran from his ankles to his calves, as if claws had raked his skin. Blood flowed slowly. Dr. Crow ran over with his bag and treated the wounds with iodine, then bandaged them. Phillips was shaking and said through clenched teeth that he had seen a hand, long, pale, with fingers ending in black claws. He said the hand had come out of the fog below and grabbed his legs, pulling with a force he couldn't fight. Redcliffe said that was enough for today. We went up to camp and didn't return to the bridge until the next morning. No one slept that night. We sat around the fire and kept it burning high. Watts told the rest of the stories he had heard in the valley. He said the creature had been born of a witch a century ago, or was a spirit of the forest that had become angry with humans for invading its domain. He said it could call out the voices of the dead and put people into a trance, forcing them to walk to the edge. He said it hunted on the bridge when the fog covered the land and preferred to grab those who were alone. Dr. Crow asked why the locals hadn't killed the creature if it was so dangerous. Watts replied that it couldn't be killed in the usual way. Bullets passed through it, knives didn't cut it. He said the only way was to leave the valley when it came. Redcliffe said we would not leave. He said the bridge was almost finished. All that remained was to secure the last rails and conduct an inspection. He said we would only work during the day, in groups, and no one would be left alone. On May 2nd, we returned to the bridge at dawn. The fog hung thick below. We worked quickly, without talking. By noon, we had secured 3 sleepers and started laying the rails. Turner and Green worked on the west side, Donovan and I on the east. Redcliffe checked the connections. Dr. Crow and Watts stayed at the top of the gorge. Around 2 o'clock, the fog began to rise. The white mass moved upward in slow waves, filling the space between the beams. The temperature dropped sharply. Our breath came out as steam. The smell grew stronger. Wet wool, metal, and something else, rotten and sweet. Then we heard it. The sound came from below. The same composite howl, 2 voices at once, low and high. It lasted a long time, echoing off the walls of the gorge. Then a thud. Heavy footsteps on the beams, slow and rhythmic. The shape rose from the fog near the southern support. I saw the head first. A long snout with an open mouth revealing rows of uneven teeth. The eyes glowed with a dull red light, without eyelids, fixed on us with intense attention. The horns curved back from the skull, black and scratched. The body followed, broad shoulders covered with pale skin that hung in flabby folds. The arms were long, ending in fingers with black claws inches long. The legs were not fully visible. The fog hid them, but the upper part showed joints bent backward like a goat's. It stood on a beam 30 feet away from us. It didn't move. Its head turned slowly, examining each of us. Its breath came out as heavy steam, carrying that sharp smell. Redcliffe shouted to run. We ran to the north side. The pounding behind us quickened. The beams shook under its weight. I didn't look back. My hands grabbed the rope leading upward. I pulled myself up, my muscles burning, my breath ragged. Green was climbing ahead of me. Turner was behind me. Donovan was last. I could hear him shouting for us to move faster. Then the shouting stopped. I looked back. Donovan was hanging from the rope 10 feet below. It was on a beam directly below him, his arms stretched upward. Claws dug into Donovan's leg. His face was contorted with pain, his mouth open in a silent scream. It pulled. Donovan's hand slipped off the rope. He fell into the fog below and disappeared. The sound of the impact didn't reach us, only silence. We continued climbing. Our hands trembled, our fingers slipped, but we held on. We reached the top and fell onto solid ground. Our chests heaved. Our mouths were dry, our tongues swollen. Watts and Crow stood at the edge, their faces white. Redcliffe was the last to reach the top and lay on his back, his eyes staring at the sky. Phillips whispered, asking where Donovan was. No one answered. We knew. That night, we didn't go back to the bridge. We sat in camp and kept the fire going. Redcliffe said the bridge was almost finished. Only the final inspection remained. He said we would finish tomorrow in daylight quickly. Green said he wouldn't go back to the bridge. He said the contract wasn't worth his life. Turner agreed. Phillips was silent but nodded. Redcliffe said the company would demand an explanation. He asked what we would say. That we ran away because of superstition? That we left the job unfinished because of the fog and the sounds? I said we would tell the truth. Redcliffe laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a bitter one. He said the truth sounded like madness, and no one would believe it. At dawn on May 3rd, we returned to the bridge. Only 4 of us, Redcliffe, Phillips, Watts, and me. Green, Turner, and Crow stayed at camp. The fog lay in a thin veil, not as thick as before. We descended quickly and silently. Redcliffe checked the beam joints and made notes in his logbook. Phillips measured the distances between the sleepers. Watts and I stood guard, our eyes scanning the fog below. By noon, the inspection was complete. The bridge matched the drawings. The rails were laid straight. The beams were secured correctly. Redcliffe signed the logbook and said the job was done. We climbed up for the last time. We did not look back at the bridge behind us. We returned to camp, packed our things, and left the valley by the evening of May 3rd. Green left for Indiana the following week and never worked as an engineer again. Turner stayed in Louisville but left construction and opened a furniture workshop on Main Street. Phillips moved to an office job at the company and no longer traveled to job sites. Dr. Crow continued to practice medicine, but it is said that he kept a bottle of whiskey in his desk and drank more often than before. Watts returned to the village down the valley and no longer took people to the bridge. Redcliffe wrote an official report for the company. He stated that the bridge had been completed according to specifications and that 1 worker had died in an accident while working at height. He did not mention the creature, did not mention the voices, did not mention the tracks. The report was accepted, and the bridge was opened to train traffic in June 1925. I wrote my own report separately. I described everything I saw, everything I heard, everything that happened in Pope's Lick Valley from April 21 to May 3rd. I submitted it to the company's chief inspector with a request for further action. The report was marked not for publication and locked away in the company archives. I was told not to discuss its contents with outsiders. They said the company valued my honesty, but some things were better left in the archives. The bridge still stands. Trains pass over it every day. Tourists sometimes come to see the high trestle that stretches across the Pope's Neck Gorge. Locals tell stories about a goat man who walks across the beams on foggy nights. As for me, I left the railroad after a year. I couldn't look at bridges anymore, at tall structures over empty space. I started making maps in an office, working at a desk, under a roof, on solid ground.